Good morning. It's me again. I told you you'd be sick of me by the end of this week, and I meant it. Welcome to the official conference-y part opening. So for those of you who didn't hear my remarks last night, I am San Cannon. I am the current president of IASSIST. I've had the honor of being in this position for the last 3 years. Usually I would be an old hand at this by now and would be very good at doing the whole conferencey thing. But as you all know, COVID, that's all I have to say. So I'm very excited that we're actually here to be able to do this both in person and as well as online. And I am keeping my fingers crossed that the people who are watching are actually seeing and hearing me. And I'm assuming that if not, I will hear about it in a few minutes. That is actually part of the theme of what I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of for this particular conference. We've worked really, really hard to try and figure out how to make this go forward, how to make sure that we could do things in a manner that was safe, that was inclusive, and that allowed for us to do the most sharing and communication that we can. You may have noticed that there have been some glitches. There will continue to be hiccups. The first one that we will face comes this morning, where only one of our 2 keynote speakers will be able to join us. That's fine. We will have challenges throughout the next few days. I hope we will be able to work through them. And I ask your patience as we figure out how to navigate the kinds of communications and interactions that I think this brave new world has led us to. I would like to think that things will go back to normal, whatever that looks like. But I really think that the changes that COVID has brought to the way that we interact, both in person and digitally, will really resonate for years to come. And we're in the process of trying to work through and figure out what that means. So in this digital era, the first thing that I would like to ask is if everybody could silence their cell phones. I know you all have them because Lord knows I can't even find a tram without my cell phone. But there is, I can tell you right now, nothing more disconcerting than being in front of a microphone in a room full of people and hearing somebody's very entertaining ringtone. I've actually been doing a presentation when somebody had an AC/DC tune go off, and I just wanted to listen to music and stop talking. So, let's be kind to the people who are up here and sweating in this very cold room. We've also had one other small change in our originally intended schedule. We were going to open with a bang, having a local celebrity VIP come and address you. Unfortunately, local means that there's a commuting woes, and so we'll have them at the end of the presentation. One of the things that I do want to do is to spend a few minutes recognizing and thanking the people who have worked so hard behind the scenes to make this happen and are still working frantically behind the scenes to make sure that things go well. SND, the Swedish Data Archive, has been a host, an identified host since 2019, before I even took office as president, and throughout the convening 3 years has done everything in their power, literally moved heaven and earth to make sure that we could actually be here. And so I would like everyone who is part of that team to stand up and be thanked. I would like to especially recognize Iris Alfredson, who has worked tirelessly to make sure that this happens. So if we could have the SND staff and Iris, please stand up and let us give you a round of applause. They're the wizards that have actually made the local parts work well. So as part of that, I want to let everybody know that there is an S&D table set up outside. And if you have questions about local things, it will be staffed by people, not now because they're all here, to help answer some questions. So the other thing that we've had a little bit different this year is we've had a supporting organization as a sponsor who has stepped up above and beyond what we normally ask of our sponsors. We'll have a formal recognition of all of the wonderful people that have contributed and are going to be exhibiting as part of IASSIST. But one organization in particular has really gone above and beyond to the point where we had to invent a new name for them. Usually we just have bronze and gold and silver and platinum sponsors, but we had to actually come up with the concept of a supporting partner, because CESDA has really been able to contribute a great deal of time and effort through the program committee, through logistical support. And I do want to make sure that I recognize those folks who I have been on 7 a.m. conference calls with for I don't know how long now. And so please, if you are part of that wonderful organization, if Irina and Nina and all of my other friends from my little Zoom boxes are here, please stand up and so we can give you a round of applause as well. Are you here? They're all hiding. There. Ha! Ivana, there we go. Now here's the second minor glitch. It was all planned. One of the things that we wanted to do also in recognition of the contribution that CESDA has made to the conference and to IASSIST over the years is to hear from the new director. Dr. Wolf Bonisch contributed to the establishment of the international nonprofit organization Science Europe, which brings together the expertise of some of the largest and best known research and research funding organizations in the world. As the head of the Research Affairs Division for the last 9 years, she was responsible for setting and implementing strategic objectives for all research disciplines, including the social sciences. She led projects of high importance linked to changes in the research system, provided scientific advice for science policies and advocacy, and leverage international and interdisciplinary multi-stakeholder networks from academia, industry, the European institutions, and member states. Could you please welcome Dr. Bonnie Wolf Bonisch.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today at the hybrid IASSIST conference on behalf of CESDA as the incoming director. I warmly welcome our audience online, which actually I don't see, but I hope they see me. And of course, the audience here face to face. And it's really good to see and meet and greet people in real life again after such a long phase. So please allow me to say some words about CESDA for those who are not familiar to CESDA. As you may know, CESDA is a European research infrastructure operating in the social science and humanities. And European, you can see, the reaching out to a European community, but it's also important to recognize that European, or the ERIC, means that it's recognized by the member states of the European Union as an infrastructure of European interest. And what I find it amazing is actually in only 10 years, CESDA went from an informal community, which I learned is about at least 40 years old, to a public company, and became some years ago a landmark for social science and humanities, an ERIC, a European Research Infrastructure Consortium. And the label, which is set up by the European Commission, and is the organization is under the auspices of the European Commission. So to put it in perspective, since the last 10 years, there are already about 21 so-called ERICs for all research disciplines. And for the social science humanities disciplines, there are 6 ERICs. So I think altogether for a whole social science and humanities community, which is a huge success. But of course, CESTA is more than just an infrastructure, it's also a consortium. So it's made up of 22 member countries and 1 observer country. And they come together and join collective efforts, the national service providers, to position themselves in the European landscape as a certified and trusted data repository, as a provider of data, tools, services to the local scientific communities, and as expert in data quality and long-term data preservation. So for the last year, CESTA and its members have been operating in an environment marked by growing complexity, and I think you can relate to that. So while our service provider operate in their national context and cope with their specific challenges, CESTA at the European level increasingly contributes to initiatives and projects that are strategic to add value to its members beyond of what would be possible at national level only. So for example, CESTA is now very active in the Open Science Cloud IASSIST. And another initiative or progress are the cross-domain collaboration called clusters in the field of social science and humanities at the European level, and CESTA is an integral part of it. And more recently, and I think it's very important, is that CESTA is reaching out also to non-traditional, non-social science and humanities disciplines, for example, in the environmental and health domain, through other discipline-specific cluster established at European level. And I think the interaction with these different disciplines, either within the social science humanities committees or other disciplines, are crucial and have mutual benefit. Because on one hand, CESTA ERIC, on behalf of its member, can showcase on European level what the social science communities, the data community can bring to the table in terms of data management expertise. But on the other way around, CESTA and its members can also learn from other disciplines, tools, services, best practices, and get inspired and bring it back also to the community they serve. And enrich also their tools and disciplines then. So altogether, I think European scientists then who use these tools and services through CESTA or through the national service provider can perhaps in the future also use tools and services from other disciplines. And at the end of the day, then also contribute directly or indirectly to solve societal challenges. We all cope with it. So that brings me to my final remark, that though I believe in diversity and not always that science is that big is always better, I also think that because we are in challenging time and funding is more and more scarce, I think also that the social science community, the data community should also be more strategic and work together on interesting projects. And yeah, so and that's for the mutual benefit, of course, and to provide better services for the scientists. So that's why also I'm very happy that CESTA can support the IASSIST conference, and where you as a data expert and service provider come together and discuss about your results and outcomes. And yes, and as I know that CESTA is, of course, an integral part of this community, so I'm very happy to be here. And also from my side, I would like to thank the local organizers as the Swedish service provider and member of CESTA since a very long time. And of course, I would like to thank the program committees, the contributors, the international partners for putting the program together. Thank you to our lovely president. And of course, again, I would also thank my colleagues from CESTA for their work and dedication. And yes, so I would like to invite you to join all the interesting workshops and sessions. And I hope you have fruitful conversation. And the final point, as my privilege of the CESTA director, I would also like to draw your attention to a session in the afternoon where CESTA will has a workshop in a session where CESTA and ERIC presents collaboration, partnership, and perspective on the European level. So thank you very much, and I wish you a very successful meeting.
There's my glasses. Excellent. And so now we get to have our local welcome. I would love for you to give a warm welcome to Håkan Eriksson, the Deputy Lord Mayor of Gothenburg.
Yeah, we need the right backdrop. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the city, I would want to give you a warm welcome to Gothenburg. Gothenburg is a city of warmth. Gothenburg is a green city, a close city where nothing is far away, a sustainable city open to the world, a city with rich industry and cultural heritage, home to workers, engineers, and entrepreneurs. Gothenburg was founded in 1621, built and organized by the Dutch, Germans, and Scots, and has since undergone quite an exciting journey from developing into a prosperous shipping and trading industry during the 18th century to becoming the diverse and lively city it is today, with the food and culture and the creative hub for innovation and research. Throughout our history, we have embraced people and influences from all over the world. And through the ages, our city developed, and with the input of other people from all around Europe and the world. And understanding the importance of knowledge, development, and innovation has truly been one of the foundations of Gothenburg over the centuries. As a result of that legacy, we have, for instance, 2 universities, Gothenburg University and Chalmers, as you may know. And I want to take the opportunity to convey just how much we appreciate conferences such as this one. It makes me proud that we can host a conference like this, where distinguished scientists and academics and professionals such as yourselves meet and collaborate and share the knowledge purposely together, take steps forward. And of course, in that spirit, it's an honor to welcome your conference. In an ever-changing world, it's well developed. It takes collaboration to take step forward, but also takes taking care of the data and sharing it, making it accessible, which of course you have the whole foundation for. Well-developed information technology and data services to support research and teaching, not least in the social sciences. And do so consciously and sustainable. Again, I want to make it simple and welcome you all to Gothenburg. I hope you will have a prosperous day and beneficial meetings when you are here. And that I hope you enjoyed the welcome reception yesterday, those of you who could attend it. And that you have time to experience as much as possible of our city, even though most of the time you may spend here. And those of you with us online may not see our city, but I hope you have time to spend as much as possible of the city, and perhaps you will become curious and want to return again, which I really hope. So you're most welcome to Gothenburg and welcome back in the future. Thank you. It's even better with audio.
Så dubbelkolla den är igång här. Är det mutad hos dig? Den är igång där. Och jag gör också. En sekund.
Oh, you get the spirit anyway. How beautiful! I can narrate it. A lot of beautiful images of a city and a prosperous science industry. I think that's it's good enough.
All about our inclusivity, that was meant directly to make sure that people who have hearing issues do not go out now. Right? That was an opportunity on it. Okay, we're on. Yay, we're back. Okay, now you get to see exactly how well technology works because we're about to try and figure out how to have our remote keynote presenter. So bear with me. I am going to try to do this, and I've got my phone with me, of course, and not my notes on how to introduce this person in case I get panic texts from technical support that I have done it wrong. I also don't have my glasses. Okay, let's pretend. No. No, you've been to me on stage several times today. Got it? Oh, thank you. The experts here. Yes, if you could get it set up for Niklas, I will introduce him. All right.
And why is this one turned off?
Okay. I'll talk while they fiddle. Okay, so, yay! You can hear us?
I can hear you very well.
Yay!
You
Okay,
hear
well,
me?
I'm about to talk about you, so tell me if I get this wrong. Niklas Blomberg PhD is director of Elixir, the European infrastructure for bioinformatics and life science data based in Hinxton, UK. Before joining Elixir in 2013 as the founding director, he worked in pharmaceutical research with AstraZeneca, 1999 to 2013, where he held a number of different roles, including establishing a joint computational biology and computational chemistry team for respiratory research and leading the global chem informatics unit. The economist in me is completely baffled by all of these other things. Niklas Blomberg holds a PhD in structural bioinformatics and protein NMR spectroscopy from EMBL Heidelberg and a BSc in biochemistry from Gothenburg University. He currently coordinates Elixir Accelerate, an EU H2020 project with 45 partners and 29 million euros in funding to develop the Elixir infrastructure to drive interoperability and the EOSC Life with 46 partners and 25 million euros. To build a collaborative digital space for European life science research between Europe's 12 life science research infrastructures. And with that, I will turn it over to Niklas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me and for that introduction. I'm really sorry I can't join in person today. It would have been fantastic, not the least because Gothenburg is my home base, and I can attest to what we just heard from the mayor. It's a lovely city. I miss the sea every day, being based far inland in the UK at the moment. But the other thing that struck me this morning is actually the similarities between Elixir, which is the research infrastructure for life science data, and CESTA, which we just heard from Bonnie, we do very much the same thing. In Elixir, we support a large community conference and work with the community to make sure that these conferences are sort of sustained and can be run repeatedly every year. And that's really the reason I can't join you today, because I'm at our big Elixir all hands meeting with all our participants from Europe. And I guess that's the second connection to Gothenburg. I'm in Amsterdam, and of course Gothenburg is in many ways modeled on Amsterdam by the Dutch traders in the 17th and 18th century. But so what I wanted to do, and what I was asked to do today, is to talk a little bit about how we work with research data in the life sciences and what we've tried to build as an infrastructure in the life sciences. And I hope that would be a starting point for a little bit of a conversation of the similarities between social sciences and the life sciences when it comes to data management. And I should say that we have started to have a really successful collaboration through CESTA in the area of COVID data, where we're trying to integrate some of the life science data sources and make sure that they can be indexed alongside the important social science data sources. So you can look at both and understand the sort of societal context of individuals at the same time as you're trying to understand the sort of fundamental biological drivers behind some of the disease and wellness parameters. That's work that's really only starting now, so I don't have a lot of results, but hopefully it can be a starting point for a conversation of commonalities and how we can work together in the future. Now it's my turn to experiment with technology. So I'm going to try to share the screen, and you will tell me if you can actually see a presentation right now. I see the corner of my slides on the projection, so I take it you can see my presentation. I hear no dissenting voices and an affirmative point in the chat, so I think we can get started.
Yeah, we can see everything perfect here.
Perfect, excellent. So the title of my talk today is Fair Everywhere. I changed it a little bit, but I think what I wanted to indicate with that is how we've gone about to try to build research data management practice for European life science. And of course, the everywhere is really meant to be taken almost literally. So for research data management to work as an infrastructure, as a service provider, as a support organization, we need, of course, to be present where the science and the researchers are. And so we are at heart a very distributed organization in Elixir. I'll come back to that. But really, I think the take-home message is how we have tried to work collectively across Europe and connect the national expert centers and establish some commonalities in how we've done research data management. And hopefully by the end of this, you will have a little bit of a flavor of how we've gone about that. And it'd be lovely to sort of compare and contrast with some of the experiences from the social sciences. But before I do that, I think we can reflect a little bit on why we do research data management. And of course, the easy answer is that because we're required to. And so there are currently a lot of funder mandates, requirements for open science in Europe, but we are also working with some of our collaborators in the US. And of course, the funders are endorsing open science. Personally, I think that's great. But that, of course, means that we will need to support our researchers to meet the funder requirements. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, how we've tried to find ways of supporting our researchers to meet those requirements. But actually, the reason why we do good research data management isn't really funder mandates. I think we do it because it's the right thing to do in science and in research. And so I'll take a little bit, or perhaps quite a long step back in biology. In biology, there is no way around Charles Darwin. And so what you see here on the screen is photos of Charles Darwin's work on barnacles, small marine mammals, the ones that you scratch your legs on when you're climbing out of the sea onto a rock. And Darwin was obsessed with barnacles. It was one of his lifelong passions. He collected a lot of barnacles. There were barnacles everywhere in his study, and actually there is a lovely story of one of his children coming home to a friend, looking at their stately mansion and said, "But where does your dad keep his barnacles?" Because there were barnacles everywhere. But the point really that I want to make, and sort of the relevance for research data management, is of course that what you see here is a very, very carefully curated database of specimens, of observations. And he collected them, he drew them, he characterized them in detail, but he also recorded the details in a very systematic and standardized way for posteriority. And that was a conscious decision. It's published in 2 large volumes on barnacles so that they would be available for other researchers to use in their theory building. And really that's how life science, and I think that's perhaps a similarity with social science. We are an observational discipline at heart. It starts with observing nature very carefully and making recorded observations on nature in a systematic way, whether it's barnacles or it's cells or it's the genomic, the genetic data of individuals. It has to be carefully curated, cataloged, and made available for other researchers to draw their theories from. And so these carefully curated collections are really the basis of what we do in the life sciences, and therefore good research data management, making data fair, if you want, well cataloged, findable, and accessible and reusable by other researchers, is really at the core of our discipline. And so the question is, of course, both how can we enable scientists to do this more effectively now when data is much more voluminous? We have terabytes of data coming out of the instruments in the laboratories, but also much more complex. You are measuring life at many different time scales. You're measuring life at many different sort of resolutions, from nanometers up to the whole ecosystems. And so the complexity of the data is quite large. But the other thing is, of course, you need to think about the value, because it costs a lot of money to maintain these large archives. And so we need to justify, why do we make the data carefully curated and available to other scientists? What is really the sort of the core value of open data? And so I'd like you to take you through a little bit of a story around this, and I hope it's accessible outside the discipline as well. So what you see on the screen here is a part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so the virus that caused COVID-19. And if you've read life science journals over the last 3 years or 2 years, you have seen images like this in every issue. And so what it is an atomic resolution of the part of the virus that triggers the infections into the human lung cells. And of course, when we talk about viral variants, people try to understand, but what is the mechanism what is the mechanism behind the variants? Why is this variant? Why is Omicron more infectious than Delta, for instance? And the answer are in these small sticks that you see on the screen. It's part of the sort of atomic composition of the virus. And so these atomic resolution images are really quite fundamental to a lot of the work in the life sciences. And we have been collecting images like this, which is really representation of molecules in the body for many years. And actually the archive of these images is one of the best curated archives in the life sciences. It was founded in 1970 by a couple of researchers with, I dare say, an enormous foresight. And it's been accumulating essentially data in the same way, in the same format, in the same carefully curated sort of descriptions for the last over 50 years. And so it's quite an important archive. And therefore, and it's completely open. Anyone can log into this, and you can start to use it in education. There's actually a really lovely projects in Cambridge locally with art schools, where they're working with artists to make representations of this. So the data is freely available and can be openly used by anyone. And so you can start to say, well, what is the value of this data? What is really the use of this data? And I think it's really interesting. So if you go back to the mid-80s, so this is a paper, an image from a paper in 1985. At that point, so that the archive had existed for 15 years, so it's quite a long time and a lot of work. At that point, and you can see it on the screen, there were 59 proteins in the archive. So you can imagine sort of the manual work required to put each of these images in the archive in those days. And at that point, there were scientists who started to look across all the data in the archive and started to extract patterns and understand how these molecules really work. And actually, in our field, this image is from a really seminal paper, because it started the whole field of what we call structural bioinformatics, but it's really a data-driven meta-analysis of these images across different life science domains. And so if you ask what is the value of this archive, well, you could say in the mid-80s, 15 years after the first images were curated, you started a whole new research field. And today this is a massive field. There are thousands of papers published every year in this discipline within life sciences. So it's a big field, and it only exists because we have carefully curated data. If you then move forward a few more years and you come to the early 1990s, there was another discovery, and this is by again a seminal paper in the field by a German scientist, Hans-Joachim Böhm, who realized that you could use this archive to understand how small molecule medicines bind into their target in the human body. And you could actually, and you see the scatter graph from those times is far from perfect, but there is some sort of correlation. And so he realized that you could start to understand in molecular details how medicines work. And actually that paper started a whole new field of molecular modeling. And when I worked in pharma, I spent 10 years as a scientist at AstraZeneca in Gothenburg. This is the sort of tools that we used every day to design new medicines and try to understand how drugs work within the body. And so again, none of this would exist without the open data archives. And so that's a second research field started from the same open data. And actually what is really fascinating is that last year there was an amazing paper published in Nature where people used artificial intelligence. And so there's been a problem or a research question in this field for very, very many years. The experiments were done in the 60s, where they showed that there is enough information in a protein to tell how it will work in the body, but no one had really been able to sort of model those experiments and build a computational or a mechanistic model that explained the experiments. And so last year, with the large data analysis effort of this archive, using Google's new artificial intelligence engines, this was actually finally solved, and people could start to predict how protein structures would look just from the sequence. So that's a problem that's been vexing the field for 30, 40 years. And suddenly there was enough open data available that you could actually make a stab at this problem. And so I think it's a hugely significant paper in the field for many reasons, not the least because it shows that it's theoretically possible to repeat the experiments from the 60s in a computer. And so it's triggered another avalanche of research. And so I think it's fair to say, if we fast forward 10 years, we'll probably look back and say, well, this is the third research field that is started from this open data archive. And actually, it's not enough. There is a fourth aspect of this, which is that the archive itself has changed the experimental methods in the field. If you go back to the first panel and the sort of carefully crafted 59 proteins in the mid-80s, well, today, actually, the whole experimental process is much faster. You can solve this within a few minutes of data acquisition. And the reason for that is that you don't need to do a lot of the painstaking manual work, because you can go into the open data archive, find similarities, and actually use that to solve some of the, as part of, replace manual steps in your experimental pipeline with automatic data analysis based on the already available data from other research groups. And so if you then look at this and say, well, actually, what is the value of fair open data in research? I think if you look in the life sciences at our most carefully curated and long-standing archive, that data is unequivocal. There is a huge amount of value of these data collections, because they spark, not only they spark new research fields, and we can say that with confidence, because if we look at the best curated archive, it sparked at least 3 new research fields within life sciences and changed fundamentally how we go about doing experiments. So I think that's these are really, for me, these are really important stories to tell when we are engaging with funders and scientists and say, well, actually, there is a lot of value in creating and carefully making data available for our colleagues, because it will drive future insights in science in ways that we can't think of today, but probably someone can think of in 50 years. So the last point I want to make on this is that none of this, the archive is called PDB, and that's why you see the logos on the screen. But this wouldn't work without a global collaboration. And so it's actually a global tripartite collaboration between America, Europe, and Asia via Japan, where groups in US, Europe, and Asia are working with the scientists in the region to capture the data and make sure that it's carefully curated. And then every day, all the data is pooled and exchanged by the 3 sort of sub-archives, so that all the data is made available to the whole research community. So it is really a truly global operation. So I guess that's the other thing to think about. If you want to achieve scale, you need to collaborate internationally. But this is one archive, and we have, of course, just like in social sciences, we have many different data types in the life sciences. So it might be data on the genetics of individuals, it might be data on diseases, it might be data on chemicals in the environment, it might be data on viral variants, on cells, and then how proteins work together in the body, and it's data on publications and people and so on. And so what you want to do is, of course, to link these different databases. And to do that, you need to have standards, and you need to curate the data within a standards-based framework. And so when we think of FAIR, we often say that, well, the interoperability, the ability to link data between databases, is what really drives reusability, because you want to understand your data in the context of all the other data that's been published by the community. And sorry. And I'll give you one example here, and I think it's really important for many reasons. So the example here is a tool from our colleagues in Estonia. It's called gProfiler, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, but it has to do with how different molecules are expressed in different parts of the body, and trying to understand what that means biologically. But of course, and so you can use these tools to do things like understand how the SARS virus will enter into cells in different tissues, and actually in tissues and demographics, so in different genetic backgrounds, and from people from different parts of the world. But of course, that tool wouldn't be possible, and it relies on other databases. And these databases, what they do is they aggregate data from a lot of underlying research data. And what I want to get across is really how important it is to recognize this ecosystem, this chain of events. It's not only a first database, it's the work of individuals, of PhD students, of scientists that build tools on aggregating databases, and these tools are then used by other research groups to understand their experiments. So there is a whole ecosystem of value that's created. And of course, for us as an infrastructure in Elixir, and I'm sure it's the same for CESTA, we need to think about how do we support every step of this chain? How can we help people to put the data in the databases in the first place? But how can we also help, say, the tool developers, the researchers that develop these analysis tools to make best use of the data? And how can we make sure that these databases then can operate at a scale where you can actually look across a large set of individuals from many different countries? And so, of course, then how you need to make the computational capacity and storage capacity available to these scientists. So it sits within the whole ecosystem, and I'm sure it's the same in the social sciences, that you need to think about the data within the context of a larger scale research endeavor, I guess. So that really boils down to the question for us is how can we help then the researchers? How can we help what we call data stewards? So often support scientists, librarians that support the research group, and how can we help the project managers of large and complex international sort of collaborations to navigate what is really a complex landscape? And I'm sure you appreciated that. And how do you make sure that they know how to contribute and put their data in the right place with the right standards? That's a huge training effort. And of course, what we see on the slide is part of our sort of Elixir community, where we bring together these individuals across our member states to work together and train and build the capacity. And I think it often comes down, and it often starts with the question, that's the question we see from many of our scientists. So where do you start when you write and execute a data management plan? Because actually support can be overwhelming. There are so many different data initiatives around in Europe and in the world. And so where do you start? What are the guidance that you should start with? And which data initiatives do you trust? But actually the support in many ways can also be a little bit underwhelming, because much of the advice, at least that's what we've seen, is really too generic. It doesn't talk about the specificities of an experimental method. It doesn't really talk about the specificities of your experimental system. It is more statements of open data and fairness at an abstract level. And so the question really is, how can we write or provide guidance to a lot of different demographics in our scientific community? It could be the bioscientists, the researchers, but it could also be the data stewards, the professionals, data managers, and the librarians that need to help the scientists. It's the lab managers and the project coordinators that are tasked with bringing together data coordination over 7-8 collaborating centers in an international project. And of course, we need to target the funders and the policymakers to make sure that they provide the right guidance to their grantees. And so we have done a few different approaches here, and I don't think the details really matter, but some of the concepts would be interesting to compare and contrast. So one of these efforts is what we call a FAIR cookbook. And what it is, it's curated protocols for research data management activities. And so you can look up a specific question, in this case, unique persistent identifiers for a given data type, be it small molecule, chemistries, be it cells or be it the genes in an experimental system, and how would you actually encode those unique persistent identifiers for your data set. But the other part of this is, of course, an estimate of return on investment. So there are some data types and experiments that are widely performed and where there is a lot of scope for reuse across the community. And of course, this is where you should invest your time, your resources, your costs in providing very well curated data. And then there are experiments that are really quite unique and sort of niche experimental systems. There aren't that many other scientists or other groups that are using or producing this data. And of course, at that level, you don't really need to provide that extensive curation because the data might only be used by a few collaborating groups in the world. And so the level of curation is much lower. And so the other part of this is to try to capture what we call a recommended fairness level, a sort of guideline for the proposal writer and the data management plan that describes the necessary effort that is needed for the curation and try to justify why you spend a lot of time and effort on curating some data types and rather less effort on sort of more niche data types, so that overall you get a better return on your investments. Because of course, providing good data takes time and it costs money, and we want to make sure that the research budgets are invested wisely. So that's one of our efforts, the FAIR Cookbook. The other, and that's a project that we are running right now, is that we call Converge. But really, it's about building up a distributed local support for data management in the life sciences. And we've done that. We have centered around the toolkit that we call RDM kit. But really, there are a couple of different components of this. So the first is that we have created a data expert network. So this is a network of people across the IASSIST member state that are meeting regularly. These are data stewards, and they collectively work on best practice, on examples, and trying to define sort of important collective problems. And we've run this network for about 2 years now, and we have 65, 70 members that are meeting every month and in sort of show and tell. And these are the people, and we'll come back to that in a minute, that really populate this toolkit. So this is what is feeding in. When we say for the bioscience community, by the bioscience community, it is really this data expert network that is the backbone of that sort of content capture. But of course, and I'm sure it's the same in the social sciences, the need for data management expertise is a lot larger than what is actually available. And so we have invested in quite a large training and capacity building effort. We have a training platform. We have a training program with competency frameworks, and actually in the Netherlands, this is now starting to be adopted as part of a career path for some of these research engineers. We're trying to professionalize data stewardship and sort of set out core skills areas where we're training people. And of course, we are delivering training, but most importantly, we're making all our training materials available, open and fair in a repository, so they can be reused and cross-linked by the whole community. And then, of course, you need some technical support. And so we've also written, and we have people, including the data experts, that are building what we call data brokering pipelines. But these are really the sort of the plumbing that connect the project data platforms into the large, what we call deposition databases. So these are the large archives. And so if we have a brief look at that, the RDM kit is open. Anyone can log in and anyone can use the materials, although I would fear that most of it is probably not targeted at the IASSIST audience. But the idea is that we're trying to support the sort of complete life cycle of a project and really capture all of the steps that you need to write in the data management plan that is submitted to the funders. And so you should be able to go into the toolkit and look at your sort of community. And we have worked with a number of different life science community, and then get examples and good practices that help you to describe how will you collect the data, how will you preserve the data, how will you share the data, and how could it then be reused by others. So you will find sort of all the components of a data management plan will have examples and guidance in the RDM kit. And the reason for this kit then is, of course, that we try to create within our community just a single focal point for that guidance. And so it should be relatively easy to find good examples and best practice. And in that sense, what we really want is to help our researchers to be self-sufficient. And so they should be able to go in and look for their domain and look at what are the tasks that you need to do. And then there should be an assembly of tools and good practices that they can use to write their project data management plan, and of course then use throughout the project cycle. And the other thing is, because as I said, support can be overwhelming. This is usually, and certainly in our case, delivered through a very large number of initiatives, services, and projects, and that's what we're trying to capture with this little logo cloud. And so we have this as a focal point where whatever project we are working in within the community, we can, someone is drawing on the screen, which is absolutely fine, but I hope you don't take it too seriously. But it is a way of sort of simplify for the community and being able to orient yourself in what is really quite a complex landscape. And so we launched this about a year ago, and actually it's been really very popular. We've got, and I think this is the most important part, we've got a really nice and large community of contributors. So it's over 125 people regularly contributing to the content. And without those contributors and the willingness to share and work together to capture this good practice, of course, this would not work. We've seen quite a lot of usage. So in our community, 7,000 users. In Europe is actually quite significant. It's a significant chunk. It's far from all of the life scientists. There are probably over 100,000 life scientists, but it is a sizable chunk, and so we are quite pleased with that. We wouldn't expect to reach every scientist, but we would expect to reach sort of key individuals in core facilities and at every university. And actually, we've managed to get this being recommended in sort of guidance to grantees documents, both from the EC and from national funders. And we think that's really good. So that's an opportunity for people to build on this. So what I wanted to do is just to give you a little bit of a flavor, without being technical, for how this sort of Fair Everywhere looks in different countries in Europe as part of our Elexi network. So the first sort of country visit, if you want, is the UK. And so our UK partners have run a sort of fair training program. And I think what is a really nice idea is that what they call Fair Fellows. So that's a sort of funded fellowship for young researchers and research engineers that then get to work with the experts in the Elexi community over 2 years on a part-time basis and get funded. Well, we haven't done staff exchange for obvious reasons in the last 2 years, but the idea is to have staff exchange and of course a lot of collaborative meetings, which have for obvious reasons been mostly over Zoom. But I think this is a really, really good initiative, and it's an effort to sort of build expertise at a lot of the member institutes in the country and make sure that sort of at every university or most of the big research universities, there are at least a few people who understand data management for their sub-discipline. If we move on to the Netherlands, so our Dutch colleagues have a really large data management program. They call it Fair Data Stewardship. And that's been connecting all the big life science research centers across disciplines, so from sort of medical research to biodiversity research. And actually, I think the big success in the Netherlands is the competency framework, and actually a recognized career profile for some of our data stewards, so that they can find their way in between sort of libraries, research centers, and universities, where there start to be a professionalization of the roles. And we've seen some people, say, moving between libraries and life science research centers. And I think that's great. What it means is that this sort of professionalization is working. We are starting to see career paths also for non-research positions within the field. If we move on to France, the image is a very complex technical diagram, and we can ignore that. But the key here is that our French community has worked both with the funding agencies, so that's sort of top left on the little inset, and the national repositories of CNRS, so on the top right, to make sure that there are essentially these plumbing pipelines that I talk about, the data brokering pipelines, are available for a large range of different data types. And so that the community, the data producing infrastructures, whether it's genome sequencing, or it's advanced imaging, or it's sort of profiling of metabolites in the blood, that there are plumbing pipelines that allow the scientists then to push the data in a standardized way into the national and the international repositories. If we look at Norway, they have done something very similar, and so the plumbing pipelines are the same. But I guess the message I want to give here is that we can reuse a lot of the plumbing pipelines, but the national contexts are, of course, very different. And so that's part of what we need to deal with as the European infrastructure, is to manage and respect this national diversity and try to find sort of commonalities that we can work on collectively that allow our national centers then to inject them into very, very different national contexts. And the last country visit is Estonia. So our partner center in Tartu, which is a computer science center. But what I think they have done is an amazing data management program over many years. So they partnered with the Estonian Research Council and the university libraries in Tartu to set up a data management capacity on a national basis. Again, it's a fairly busy slide, but there are a few take-home messages if we look at the pipeline or the timeline. And it's of course centered around sort of capacity building and writing courses, both for the principal investigators and for the PhD students, in collaboration with the university library, so that, and this is across disciplines, so we were working on, our partner center were working on the life science part, is to make sure that every scientist at Tartu University knew how to do research data management. But if we look above the pipeline, we have numbered boxes, and this is where Estonian scientists were visiting some of our other centers to help to build the Estonian capacity. So this is bringing in knowledge and experience into the Estonian centers. And if we then look at the lettered boxes below the timeline, then those are courses which are given locally. So we helped, and the Estonian node were very consciously building up a trainer capacity within the University of Tartu, and then used that to deliver a large number of courses locally to build the capacity across the whole of the life science departments in the university. So I think this is a really nice example of how they've been working quite strategically over a number of years to build that support capacity for a large research university. And so what I wanted to end with is just one example of the work that we have done in the last couple of years on COVID-19. And this is also where we are working in a project called By COVID with SESTA. So Marie Klemola from the Finnish SESTA archive is actually co-leading one of our work packages. And so what we are trying to do in the By COVID project is really to mobilize data from different disciplines and a lot of different organizations, be it social science data archives. We have partners in the public health institutes. And of course, we have a lot of biological molecular data, in particular viral genomes and the variants that we all have been sort of following in the media from the research centers across Europe. And so the idea is to mobilize this and find ways and pipelines and plumbing to be able to share this data out of the different research centers and data archives, and then to connect this in a reasonably standardized way. And this is where Marie is involved, is to set up a sort of cross-domain indexing method where we can actually discover data, relevant data across the domain, and then finally find ways of exposing this data for analysis by the community. And part of this is the European COVID-19 data portal that we've been involved in. And we've been using a range of community standards and tools, and the logos are at the bottom, but I think for the purpose of this talk, we can ignore them. But the key here is actually that, and I think that's the challenge for the future, is that we need to start to work together across discipline and find ways where we can advertise, index, and discover data in an easy way across disciplines to support, again, coming back to Darwin, support new ways of putting your research data into a wider context of other experiments and analysis from the community. So I think I will end there and just try to summarize our strategy. So what we've tried to do when it comes to research data management is really to increase the self-sufficiency by the community and help researchers to find, to know, and to utilize the research data management services that are available. And to do this, we need to build capacity, and we need to help to build the skills in every research institute. And I hope you appreciate it. I think the example from Tartu is wonderful, but really this wouldn't work if we hadn't tried to pool the expertise of the whole community and work with the community and actually convince them that this is by the community for the community. So I will end there and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. And I'm sorry I couldn't visit you in person.
Okay, do we have any questions? Oh, we have microphones somewhere. Do.
Thank you so very much for your wonderful presentation. I would like to add to your point about Elixir convergence, the distributed support for data management that you mentioned in your presentation within the Elixir collaboration. We have, if it comes to research data management, many core facilities at universities in Sweden. Most of them are not integrated into Elixir. Many are quite small. They work under rather difficult conditions. But all these core facilities would play a very important role to reach out to researchers to help implementing practices for good data practice, fair data principles, those sorts of things. What would be your ideas to reaching out to those facilities that may work at a local level under rather difficult conditions, because they are very important. If we only think of those that are part of Elixir, that are national facilities, then this is a rather small number. So yeah, this is one question that I would like to discuss. What ways would there be to integrate core facilities in a broader sense? Now I'm only talking about Sweden, but this question might be relevant for other countries too. In implementing a good research data practices, FAIR principles, data management plans, and those sorts of things. If I now think about life science, I think I'm research coordinator at the University of Umeå, and if it comes to data management plans, I talk to people from medical science, social science, human science. People who come from life science are very rare. Yeah. On the other hand, we have many small core facilities at that university in this area. Yeah, so I stop talking here. Yeah, to sum it up, what perspective would there be to reach out to core facilities, in particular to those who work under difficult conditions? That means limited funding, yeah, no long-term sustainable perspective for own work and those sorts of things. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question, and I think it's not only in Umeå in Sweden. I think that sort of scenario, I think many people and many core facilities will recognize themselves in that description. I mean, we haven't solved that problem. It's a challenge, and we can only start to nibble away at that challenge. And the approach we've taken, we have some good examples, and I think we have a lot of work left to be done, is really based on our national centers. So in Elixir, most of our national centers are distributed in the sense that they are coalitions or well, coalitions, I guess, of a large number of universities in a country. So if we look in Estonia, that's relatively simple. Estonia have 3 large universities, and Tartu is by far the biggest. And of course, the example I gave in that sense is a very easy one, because there was a university-wide effort where they worked with all the core facilities and all the disciplines, and that was coordinated by the research library. In a country like Sweden, I think that is probably much more difficult. In Sweden, our national partner is called NBIS, the National Bioinformatics Infrastructure in Sweden, and NBIS have people represented at each of the major universities, all the higher education institutes, and so they have a data managers network that is trying to work with the sort of local core facilities and experimental centers to help them to capture the data. But are we there for 100%? No, we're not. But I think that is really our approach, to build on this sort of distributed nature of our national centers. We start to see, and I think the UK, and that's why I highlighted the example, we're really trying to address that with their FAIR fellows. So that is a way of sort of recognizing people at these core facilities in different domains and give them a chance to sort of develop professionally and to form a larger professional network, which is, of course, individually, on an individual basis, quite rewarding. So I think there is a range of different tools. And of course, then the fact that we are trying to work collaboratively across Europe to have a common set of tools and pipelines is quite important, because very few of our national centers and local experts have, of course, the resources to build a complete data brokering pipeline for a large and complex endeavor by themselves. But they definitely have the skills to use someone else's pipeline, and they definitely have the skills to contribute collectively to build sort of advanced pipelines in collaboration with 10, 15 other centers. So I think those are sort of our approaches, but it's a smorgasbord, and we try to sort of cater to the diversity of needs in our community.
Excellent. We actually have a question from our hybrid audience. I have it here. And I need my glasses. So I'm going to interpret the question a bit. That the direct wording is, how can the initiative of Elixir on data management be extended to non-English speaking countries? Given that it's mostly European countries, they're all basically non-English speaking from a first language perspective, but I wonder if it means in places where English is not well established as an international communications mechanism.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and actually I think that's what we're trying to do. I mean, we are naturally distributed. We have all our centers are local, and we see a great deal of diversity in terms of the language preferences. So, for instance, if we look at COVID-19, we set up national portals for COVID-19. In some countries, they were in national language. In other countries, they were in English. And I think that sort of depended a little bit on the audience they were targeting. So again, I'll pick on Estonia, but they are really doing, it's a small country that doing wonderful work, and they are really leading in the sort of computer science sense. They set up their portal very quickly in Estonian, because they wanted it to be transdisciplinary and also reach out to policymaker and the local communities. Other countries chose to write their portals in English, and that's because they mainly catered to life science professionals that in most European countries is an international workforce, and so they choose English. But of course, this is a choice that our national centers will have to do, and I think it will vary quite a lot, and we are not trying to be prescriptive. I think rather we're trying to build on that diversity. It will vary a lot depending on the local research practices, but I should say at least in the life sciences, the workforce is very international in most of our research centers, and that means that we do center on English as a sort of common language, because there are people from all around the world working in most of our research centers. I appreciate that's very different in many other sciences, because you are working with data in the local language, and so it's much more natural to have a language diversity. But I don't think there's anything contradictory that you just have to accept the diversity and work with and support the diversity.
Excellent. All right, any other questions? In that case, please join me in giving a warm thank you to Niklas for being our first remote presenter.
And I think it works, so thank you very much for having me.
All right, and we're right on time to start getting ready to take a break. I want to point out a few more logistic pieces. For those of you who are presenting today, the breaks in between sessions are the perfect time to make sure that you get your presentation loaded locally. If you are here presenting, for those who are presenting remotely, I'm hoping that you can run it from your own machine. But please go enjoy the time chatting with folks. We're all in these 4 rooms, G1 through 4. There should be coffee and snacky things out amongst our exhibitors. Please go visit our sponsors, and please enjoy the rest of your conference day. And thanks again, Niklas.